People who live rurally, what's the scariest experience you've had that you can't explain? Story 1. My mother lives alone pretty much in the woods. It is completely dark at night, with no street lights or lights from neighbors, only a small road leading up to the house. One time in the middle of the night, she woke up to clear footsteps on the gravel. You know that sound. And then 3 knocks on the front door. She called out hello and looked outside, but there was nothing there, only silence. It might not be a spectacular story, but I would absolutely freak out if it were me waking up to that in the middle of the night with no other people around. Story 2, I grew up on a small property in regional Australia. We lived about 3 to 4 kilometers out of town, so not super far, but far enough that we never really got disturbed. On top of that, we were on a dead-end street, at the end of another street off the main road, so I had never once seen a pedestrian near my house. One night, when I was about 12, I was watching television when 2 of my brothers came downstairs and asked if I heard that. I was pretty glued to the television, so I did not hear a thing, but apparently they heard footsteps outside and a couple of hushed voices. Since my brothers were both around 20 and both big rugby playing guys, their plan was for me to wait inside while they ran outside and tackled anybody they could find before calling the police. They both sprinted out the front door at the same time, splitting in different directions to wrap around the house and meet again on the other side, presumably each with a criminal wrapped in a headlock under their arm. If you have ever seen that movie Signs, where Mel Gibson and Joaquin Phoenix run around the house, basically just picture that. They never found anyone. To this day, they swear they heard voices, but nobody was ever seen. Our property had a lot of thick bushland right up to the house, so all we can think is that when my brothers came out, whoever was there just slipped back into the bush and watched, then probably took off once the coast was clear. The whole thing scared the hell out of me. Story 3, I was a live-in caretaker for a 94-year-old woman with Alzheimer's for about a year and a half. She had moved into her daughter's home deep in the woods in the middle of nowhere in Washington. Marie was prone to saying strange things like that her sister, mother, and husband, all deceased, were in the house or outside regularly. I had been working with dementia patients for a few years by that point, so it never bothered me. Marie was terrified of the woods and would tell me there were dangerous animals out there and that I could get lost easily, so I must always stay inside. She was also worried about her mother and husband having to travel through them. Again, this was not worrisome behavior given her health condition. I had been working with her for about 6 or 7 months when I started waking up to her, walking down the halls in the middle of the night. Sundowning is fairly normal for people with Alzheimer's, so again I was not troubled. But she began going to a specific window and giggling, like she was interacting with someone outside. When asked what she was doing, she would say her mother was out there. It was strange, but there was clearly a different perception in her world by then. One night, in the dead of winter, her daughter and I were awakened by the house alarm system blaring. We checked all the doors and windows, none of which seemed disturbed or unlocked. The only thing missing was Marie. She was nowhere in the house. Panicked, I rushed outside to find her, while her daughter continued searching inside. There were no tracks anywhere, no disturbed snow, nothing. After 10 to 15 minutes of yelling and searching the woods, I started making my way back to the house, where her daughter was already in the process of calling 911. As I approached the house, I saw Marie standing outside the same window she usually stood at, giggling. There was not a single footprint in the snow around her, nor was she cold to the touch. She was just standing there laughing at nothing and did not even know she was outside. Her late-night window visits became more frequent after that, but less happy. She would get combative with the window and scream at whoever she believed was there. Then it stopped one day. One of the last conversations I had with Marie before she passed, she told me not to let them take her into those woods. I hope they did not. Story 4. I grew up in rural southeast Kansas. When my friends and I were young, around the ages of 10 to 14, we went out at night to a shallow creek and small forest about a mile from my best friend's house. We had a few pellet guns, air guns, and maybe one knife between us for messing around, and that was about it. After a few minutes of walking in the woods, we all felt incredibly watched. Something was following us, but none of us could get a clear look at it. Some kind of deep, instinctive dread took over the group, and we drew in close, facing outward in all directions. We ran as fast as we could out of the forest and back into the tall grass prairie that led to the house. I looked back at the tree line and believe I saw a mountain lion's tail disappearing into a bush. I told my friends to stay close, and we made it back home safely. We later talked to my friend's dad, who worked in the local parks and recreation department and knew people from Fish and Game. He said the official story was that there were no big cats in southeast Kansas, but there had been quiet talk of a potentially untracked male in the area. Story 5. Our two normally placid black Labradors woke me up. My bedroom was on the ground floor, making an awful growling, barking sound I had never heard from them before, with real aggression and fear in it. We lived in the countryside with a huge common area and woods out the back of the house. I went into the kitchen and they were glaring at the back door, making a huge fuss, and this made my hair stand on end because their obvious terror transferred straight to me. I grabbed a torch and steeled myself, thinking maybe it was an intruder, armed myself with a fire poker, and opened the back door. It was pitch dark, and as I opened it, both dogs shied away and ran into the other room. I poked my head and the torch out of the doorway, and just for a split second, I saw reflective eyes of a really large creature somewhere up the garden, maybe 10 meters away. They blinked as they turned away, and then they were gone. There is literally nothing in England that can account for this. I slammed the door shut, and the dogs and I slept in my bedroom, half terrified. Shortly after that, the local paper featured an article about unexplained sheep deaths on a farm about a mile away from ours. They had been ripped to shreds as if by a large predator. Story 6. I lived and worked in the southern coastal town of Albany in Western Australia for a number of years, where my job required me to travel to various rural communities around the region. One afternoon, I was returning home along a very flat, long stretch of Albany Highway when I had to overtake a farmer in his old utility vehicle, Australian slang for a pickup truck. So far, this was very typical of traveling along an average country road. But as I pulled in ahead of him, I checked my rearview mirror as I always did. And even though this happened over 25 years ago, I can still vividly recall the absolute confusion when I saw there was no car behind me at all. This was not at night, but around 1 o'clock in the afternoon. There was no sun in my eyes, no shadows on the road, and no side roads he could have suddenly turned down. I was easily going around 110 kilometers per hour, which meant he was going about 90 to 100 kilometers per hour. I looked into the rearview mirror the moment I pulled back into the correct lane, so I cannot believe he could have slowed down and turned off at that speed without me seeing him. There were no trees, just flat paddocks on both sides. To this day, I am still completely flummoxed about what happened, and even now typing this out, I feel creeped out remembering how much it affected me. It really felt like something out of a Stephen King novel. This is the first time I have recalled this story since it happened. Weird and deeply unsettling, but true. Story 7. I grew up on a ranch in a small old California ranch house with lots of windows to stay cool in the summer, and almost all the rooms opened into the central living room. I was probably 14, my brother was 11, and my mom was out that night running an errand. My brother and I were together in the living room. He was sitting by the stove, and I was lying on the sofa, both of us doing homework. Inside, the lights were on, but through the windows it was pitch black. As I was reading, I heard footsteps on the mud porch leading up to the front door. It was an old house, and I heard the heavy footsteps clearly, but I had not seen my mom's car drive in or heard any vehicle at all. Living in the country, I would have heard a car approaching and seen headlights through the dark windows, but there was nothing, just footsteps stopping at the front door with no knock. I was frozen. If I got up and looked around the corner through the kitchen, I would have seen whoever owned those footsteps standing at the door, which had a window, but then they would have seen me. If I spoke to my brother, they would hear me, and in the dark, anyone could be watching us through the windows while we could not see out. I ran through every option in my head. The person was standing at the only door in or out of the house, which was always unlocked. If I went to the kitchen to grab a knife, they would see me and know I saw them. We could not hide because the house was too small and they would see where we went. My heart was racing, and my best option was to pretend I did not know they were there for as long as possible and be ready for whatever came next. After a few minutes, I heard no more footsteps and slowly calmed down, convincing myself I had imagined it. About 20 minutes later, I heard my mom's car and saw the headlights sweep across the windows. I ran outside because I was still a child and wanted my mother to know how scared I was. But before I could say anything, she asked me who had left the water on, and I was instantly terrified again. We had a strange water spigot in the front yard, a pole that came up to about waist height with the spigot turned upward instead of downward. My brother and I used it like a drinking fountain or turned it on full blast to play under it. When she got home, the water was on full blast, shooting several feet into the air. Someone had been on our porch that night. They saw my brother and me alone, with no car in the driveway. They did not come inside, but they wanted us to know they could have. Story 8. Oh man, do I have a story for you. So stick around until the end. My family and I once lived deep in my family's woods, where no one could see our small plot. Just forest all around. And although other family members lived nearby, they were farther down the dirt road. We had no light poles, so it got extremely dark back there at night. I started noticing a light above the trees and realized it was not a star because it would sway, rise quickly, completely disappear, then descend behind the trees. And this went on for a few days with me being the only one who saw it. My dad hired some guys to help him build a deck, and my husband kind of knew one of them and would invite him to dinner after work. That light always seemed to get closer whenever that guy was there, sometimes even at tree level, which I knew because I could see it behind the trees, clearly not in the sky. I eventually showed it to my husband, kids, and the guy, since I had not mentioned it earlier in case I was imagining things. My daughter decided to play with it and said, "Follow me if you are an alien." Then walked to the left and the light went left. Then she went right and it followed, then right again and it followed again, which scared me badly. The guy got so freaked out that he left, and the light followed him as he walked away, which terrified all of us. I should add that the man lived in the woods behind us, so it was easy to see the light descend toward where he lived, as he was not very far away, just separated by forest. For about 4 days, the light followed him whenever he left, and I was convinced he was about to be abducted by aliens. I would stand at the window for hours, staring into the darkness, afraid I would miss some dramatic moment that confirmed my fears. One night the man did not come, but the light was still there, and by then I had nearly lost my mind worrying about my kids being taken. I yelled at it, asking what it wanted, and as I walked, it followed me, which sent me into a panic. I flipped it off, and it seemed to dive toward me, and in that moment I truly thought I had angered aliens, and they were about to crash into me. Then it disappeared while my back was turned as I ran for my life. I told my father what was happening, and he asked if I was on substances, which made me furious, and he handed me a shotgun and told me to shoot it next time if it was real. The light only ever came back when that man came back and always left when he left. And I never shot it because I figured that would only make aliens angry. I never saw it again and lived in fear of aliens in the dark woods for the rest of our time there. Years later, I read a local news article explaining strange lights, describing how local police used drones to catch substance dealers and other criminals, and my jaw dropped. I was about 21 when all this happened, far more naive than I am now, and this was before drones were common or well known, especially since I barely used the internet then. I later remembered that not long after the deck was finished, that same man was arrested on substance charges and other things involving what was called the Mexican Mafia. We were shocked because we thought he was just a regular substance dealer, which we did not mind, but organized crime near our kids was terrifying. So I spent part of my life scared of aliens, when it was most likely police drones, probably operated by someone bored or trying not to get caught. Or maybe they wanted us to think it was aliens, or maybe it really was aliens and my brain just chose a safer explanation. If it had been police and I had shot it like my father suggested, I would probably still be in prison today, so I am very glad I did not. Story 9. My dad once rented a house far out in the middle of nowhere, about 45 minutes from any town, with the closest neighbor another 15 minutes away. On the property were several enclosures used to raise pheasants, which belonged to the property owner, so my dad's only responsibility was to notify him if anything seemed wrong, and they were on good terms because they had been friends since high school. One morning, my dad noticed something was very wrong in the enclosure farthest from the house, which held around 50 birds, because every single pheasant had been slaughtered overnight. What made it even stranger was that it did not look like an act of predation, since none of the birds had been eaten. Fortunately, the owner had cameras installed, and they were able to see exactly what happened. Sometime during the night, a man neither of them recognized wandered onto the property, made no attempt to approach the house, crawled under the fence of the enclosure, and proceeded to catch and stab every pheasant with a knife while wearing a headlamp. The cameras recorded the entire event, from him entering the property to him leaving in the early morning. The police were called, but nothing ever came of it. My dad was so shaken by the incident that he made us stay with our mom for several weeks while he slept with a gun nearby. The property owner increased security with new fences, alarms, and guard dogs, which were well trained and friendly during the day. Nothing like that ever happened again on the farm, and the person who killed the birds was never found. Story 10. I live alone in the woods about 15 minutes from my town, with neighbors nearby but not right next door. One summer morning, I woke around 4:30 in the morning to a strange pounding sound, and it was still that dusky dawn light while I was half asleep and disoriented. Then I started hearing a man's voice yelling for somebody to help him. I looked out my windows upstairs to see if I could spot anyone, but could not see him from there. My house has no window coverings at all. I went downstairs and caught a glimpse of him, naked except for a thin t-shirt, running around my house and trying to jiggle the windows and doors. He was extremely erratic, constantly screaming for help and running from door to window all around the house, desperately trying to get inside. In any normal situation, I would help someone in need without hesitation, but this felt far too unpredictable and dangerous to let him into my home. I managed to contact my neighbors, who got my message and came over quickly, much faster than any police response could arrive. The man ran straight into the trees before they reached my house. He was picked up shortly after by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. I still have no idea what was really going on. Story 11. My wife, kids, and I live about 30 miles outside of town on 100 acres, with the house sitting about half a mile off the main road. When we bought the place, my wife wanted full security, so I installed a gate, a driveway alert past the gate, cameras at both the gate and the house, an alarm system, and we even got 2 new puppies. I have lived far out in the country my whole life, so I am used to hog squeals, coyote screams, deer snorting, and all of that. One night around 2 in the morning, I heard a loud shattering sound that was instantly overtaken by the house alarm siren. The main alarm keypad is in our bedroom, and I saw that the glass break sensor in our son's bedroom had been triggered. Expecting the worst, I grabbed a shotgun that I keep for rattlesnakes and ran toward his room, yelling for my wife to grab our youngest from his crib just in case. I could hear my oldest son screaming, and I was shaking so badly that I could barely turn the doorknob as pure adrenaline took over. I threw the door open and yelled as loudly as I could to intimidate a possible intruder, only to find my son clinging to the crib rails with glass all over the floor and cold winter air pouring into the room. I shut the bedroom door behind me, picked him up, and frantically checked the bathroom, closet, and every nearby space where someone could be hiding. I called out to my wife again, and she responded with our code to let me know she was alone and safe. I took my son to her, handed her the shotgun, and told her I would grab the rifle and check inside and outside. I grabbed a flashlight and scanned the entire house, then went outside, locked the deadbolt, and made my way to the broken window. As my adrenaline settled, I tried to convince myself it had to be a deer seeing its reflection and crashing through the glass. I searched everywhere and found no sign of what caused it, and the cameras showed nothing around the house at that time either. I could not sleep the rest of the night, and it took weeks before I let my son sleep in his own room again. I am fairly sure it was just a deer, but I have always wondered if someone broke the window, heard the alarm, and ran. There was a blind spot covering that window, so I installed more cameras afterward, added motion-sensing floodlights on all 4 corners of the house, and now one of our dogs sleeps beside my son's bed every night. Story 12. We live in a densely forested area in the northwestern United States, almost like a rainforest. The land where we built our modest home has no known history of being lived on, although native people may have occupied it before European settlement. Our experiences have mostly involved cats, But these cats are not alive. Over the past 15 years, we have seen several different ones, with sightings coming in bursts where we have multiple experiences and then nothing for months. The cats are usually seen sitting on the toilet, near the bathroom sink, or darting quickly out of bedrooms or the front door. One time my daughter had her teenage friends over, and three of them saw a black and white cat come out of a bedroom and run under the chair at the table where they were sitting. At least 9 people have seen these cats, which appear orange, beige, or black and white. Once, while my mother was visiting, we heard 2 disembodied meows a few seconds apart while she was talking, even though my only living cat was asleep on my lap. My daughter and I have both felt an unseen cat brush against our legs while standing at the bathroom sink, where we keep our living cat's food and water. Our real cat is an orange Manx with a short tail and is 100% indoors, while the orange ghost cat we have seen has a full tail. We have never owned any of these cats, but we suspect they may have been local animals that met a bad end with dogs, coyotes, or something worse. Story 13. I used to work in a state park in a rural town, and I regularly hiked in through a park trail from town to my office. There were several routes, with the trail being the longest, but also the prettiest. One morning I had enough time to take the trail from the road where the bus dropped me off. As I turned a corner, I saw a woman ahead of me jogging, which was not unusual on this trail. I looked down at my phone while walking, expecting her to pass me, but when I looked up a few seconds later, she was gone. Completely gone. There was nowhere she could have gone without making a lot of noise in the brambles or remaining visible from where I was standing. I stood there confused for a few seconds and looked around, thinking she might have fallen or taken a side trail, but she was absolutely nowhere, even though she would not have had enough time to move far enough for me not to see her in the open areas beneath the trees. I eventually moved on, assuming my mind was playing tricks on me. Further down the same trail, I saw a small, white, fluffy dog jump out of some bushes with no owner in sight. I smiled and tried to get its attention as I approached. The dog looked at me, turned, and walked down the trail ahead of me. As I got closer, it turned off into an open side area beneath the trees that I could see clearly. As I watched, one moment the dog was there, and the next moment it was not. No sound, no movement, nothing. I stood there blinking in the morning light, questioning whether I had actually seen a dog at all, and then thought again about the woman at the top of the trail. That was when I realized neither of them had made a single sound. To this day, I still cannot explain what happened to me that morning, whether it was a time glitch, ghosts, or something else entirely. Story 14. I grew up living in a rural area with a neighbor across the street who had a long driveway, meaning they might have heard a scream only if it was extremely loud. One night when I was around 12, I was babysitting my younger brother, who was 10. I was upstairs watching television while he was downstairs playing video games. From where I was sitting, I could see car lights from people driving along the gravel road, which was fairly busy during the day and not unusual to see cars on at night. That night, however, I noticed a car driving very slowly back and forth past our house. At one point, it pulled into our driveway and circled around the property. I started panicking and locked all the doors. When the car finally left, I felt slightly better, but about half an hour later, I saw a car speeding past our house on the gravel road with a police car chasing it. I never found out what happened, but it scared me badly. Another story is not rural and is actually kind of funny. I later lived in a suburban house and had a doorbell camera because someone had been cutting my Halloween decorations. Halloween had already passed, so I was not worried about anyone showing up on the camera at night. I had just worked a night shift and was awake around 2 in the morning when my phone started sending notifications that someone was at my front door. I panicked because my roommates were all at work and would not be home for hours. I finally worked up the courage to open the camera app and saw that it was just a deer eating leaves from one of my front bushes. I felt relieved and also a little embarrassed for freaking out. Story 15. I once experienced what I believe was sleep paralysis or something similar. My room was split level, and I woke up to my dog barking softly under the blankets. Those small precursor barks that were fairly common, so I rolled over. The clock read 3:11 in the morning and then clicked to 3:12. At that moment, a car started slowly coming down our long driveway, about 150 yards, and I could see it the entire way while I lay frozen in bed. My dog began barking more aggressively, and I realized I could barely move, only my head. Then the front door of the house opened, and in the light coming down from upstairs into my room, I saw a dark shadow rushing down the stairs and, in an instant, leaping onto me. I jolted awake from what I realized had been a nightmare. My dog gave a small precursor bark again. I rolled over. The clock read 3:11 and then 3:12. A car came down the driveway, but this time it was my mother returning from drinking, coming inside and talking normally in that typical 3 in the morning drunken way. As a bonus story, that same house was broken into once. I came home exhausted after a 12-hour shift and found the window in the door broken and the door ajar. I called my mom immediately while walking through the house, and when she asked if they were still there, I suddenly realized I had no idea and slowly backed out. It really made me realize how differently people react to situations, because instead of panic, I went straight to irritation. Another thought that stuck with me is how much a certain found footage horror movie ruined the woods for me. I grew up camping by our creek in tents, but after that film, the woods never felt innocent again. Living in the country has an eerie darkness to it. The sounds of the woods, the silence, the lack of light, and how moonlight seems to invite mischief. One final thought I learned is that when someone comes to your door offering to sell something or give free help, they may be casing your house. It happened to us in California when my wife almost gave strangers a tour, and I had to force them out by making it very clear that staying would be a bad idea, something that is common knowledge when you live rurally. Story 16. I lived in the country for a few years, and for the most part it was amazing, and there were not many times when strange things happened that I could not explain rationally. But there was one night I still remember clearly. My mom and stepdad were out, and my grandma, who lived with us, was sitting in the living room, waiting for them to come home. The television was off, my brother was not home, and it was just the two of us. Earlier that evening, there had been fireworks set off from a farm up the road, so it was not a completely quiet night. Just after the fireworks died down, I heard something clinking against the gutter drain at the front corner of the house, followed by light tapping against the exterior wall of the living room. My grandmother was already a nervous person and tried to ignore it, but because there had recently been vandalism at another house in the area, I looked out the window into the darkness to see if I could make anything out, which I could not. I decided to grab my stepdad's pistol just to be safe and open the front door, stepping onto the porch so I had a clear line of sight, standing there quietly and listening. I did not hear anything unusual, so I went back inside, told my grandma it was probably an animal, and put the gun away. After she went to her room, the tapping started again. I listened for a moment, grabbed the pistol again, and this time took a flashlight. As I moved toward the door, the tapping turned into heavy thumping that moved up the wall and onto the roof. I had seen raccoons climb walls before, but this did not sound like that, as the movements were heavier and more deliberate. When the thumping crossed the roof toward the back of the house, I decided to relock the door I had just unlocked and went down to my basement room instead. The next morning I went outside and found a few disturbed spots near the drain and a mark on the wall that looked like something had struck it, but nothing that clearly pointed to a person or an animal, and it never happened again. Story 17. I was fishing alone on a river outside a very small town in Colorado. It was dusk, and I was standing in the middle of the stream about 10 to 15 feet downstream from a bridge when I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye on the bridge. There were ranch houses in the area, although none seemed occupied at the time, and based on the size and movement, my first thought was that it was a German Shepherd from one of those properties. I turned to get a better look, and at the same moment it stopped crossing the bridge and stood at the edge directly above me, watching. That was when I realized it was not a dog at all, but a large mountain lion, and it had the high ground. I shouted as loudly as I could that I could see it, and it stayed still for a few seconds before slowly turning and walking away out of sight. By then it was nearly dark, my heart was racing, and I no longer knew where the animal was, but I still had to get back to my truck, which was parked a short distance past the bridge on the right side of the river. The most direct route would have taken me through thick brush under the bridge up to the road, which felt like a perfect ambush spot, especially since the cat had not seemed very alarmed by my shouting. The other option was to head up the left bank, which had little vegetation, but was the direction the animal had come from, then cross the bridge itself. I chose that option, singing loudly as I went and constantly looking over my shoulder. I reached my truck, changed out of my waders, broke down my rod as fast as I could, and drove away. I never saw the mountain lion again, but not long after that I bought a 357 caliber handgun to carry when I fish alone. Story 18. I do not live in a rural area, but I work frequently in rural parts of the United States. I used to work as a field archaeologist, and we often came across strange things in the middle of nowhere, on mountaintops or deep in forests and swamps. One time, while doing high-altitude survey work in the mountains of Colorado, there were 3 of us spread out in parallel survey lines through an alpine forest. Every 50 meters, we dug a hole 50 centimeters by 50 centimeters and screened the soil by hand, recording soil type, artifacts, and other details on standardized forms. And we did this for miles at a time, for 10 hours a day, which is the reality of that job. I was on the far right survey line, climbing uphill over boulders and through trees toward a ridgeline, when I stepped down into a small opening in a boulder field and noticed an old tree with symbols carved into its bark that had clearly been recarved multiple times. Around the base of the tree was a small but distinct stone circle, along with wooden figures made from twisted twigs and what looked like small offering bowls containing food and a dark liquid. There were also animal bones included in the arrangement. I called my survey partners over, and we photographed and documented the site on a cultural record form, even though it was clearly modern. Something about the place gave me a deeply uneasy feeling, and it was one of the strangest things I ever encountered while working out in the wilderness. Story 19. When I was about 14, I lived with my grandparents in the country. I had 2 dogs. One was an English Mastiff named Jax, and the other was a miniature Australian Shepherd and Corgi mix named Blue. One night I was lying in bed when my dogs suddenly started going absolutely crazy, barking at something outside in the dark. I let them outside to calm them down, but the moment I opened the door, they both bolted straight into the darkness. I yelled for them to come back inside for about 15 minutes, but they were gone. About 45 minutes later, I called for them again, and Blue emerged from the darkness from the same direction they had run. I kept calling for Jax, and eventually he came back inside too. I returned to my room, but something was very wrong with Jax. He stopped in the doorway and just stood there, growling very quietly. I did not understand what was happening, so I walked toward him, and when I got about 2 feet away, he suddenly began growling viciously. He had never growled at me like that before. I backed away and sat on my bed, and he stared at me for a long time before finally walking back into the living room. For the rest of the night, I could not get close to him without him growling. And whatever happened to him that night was completely out of character and deeply unsettling. Story 20. I move around the Midwest and the West Coast every few months and have experienced plenty of strange situations. But the only time I truly felt concern for my safety happened around 1 in the morning between Susanville, California, and Reno, Nevada. Between those places, there is a stretch of small towns, and then about 30 miles before Reno, there is a canyon with no roads or turnoffs for miles. I was driving toward the Grand Canyon and preferred driving through Nevada at night instead of during the day. That night already felt off because the town before the canyon appeared to have no power at all, with the gas station completely dark and the houses blacked out. About 5 miles into the canyon, I noticed what looked like a tall black pillar or figure about half a mile ahead. I slowed down and turned on my light bar and realized it was a person walking along the side of the road. They were wearing a black hoodie and blue jeans, and I was at least 15 miles from the nearest turnoff, which immediately felt wrong. I often pick up hitchhikers, but something about this person made my skin crawl. As I approached closer, they were walking with traffic so I could only see their back. But when I got to about 50 feet away and slowed to around 20 miles per hour, they suddenly turned and looked at me in a way that felt deeply disturbing, then immediately jumped over the guardrail. I floored it and drove through the canyon at an extremely high speed, completely shaken by the encounter. Story 21. There are several experiences I can share, and I will start with the least paranormal. One night I was sitting outside watching goats when I heard coyotes going wild to the northeast, but then a constant warbling growl came from the same direction and drowned them out until the night went completely silent. And despite hunting hogs, invasive bobcats, and many other animals across North America, I have never heard anything like it before or since. In my parents' house, you can sometimes hear people having conversations through the walls, but the sound stops the moment you leave the room, and everyone who visits often has experienced this at least once. One time I was showering with the bathroom door open while my family was away and heard the door open, voices talking and laughing, and items being put away. So I rushed out to greet them, only to find nobody there. No cars outside, nothing moved, our bloodhound undisturbed while the smaller dogs were panicking. And when I called my parents, they told me they were still 2 towns away. When I was very young, around 4 or 5, my mother would sometimes sleep in the living room with me and my sisters. And one night while watching television, we heard the ferret gate at the bottom of the stairs slam shut, causing my mother to rush to wake my father, who found nothing, even though the stairs were carpeted, and it later took significant force to recreate the sound. Another incident my parents often mention happened when my sister and I were toddlers, when they heard deliberate knocking on their bedroom wall, called the police, and even dogs found no trace of anyone. Later, when I was around 14, I was playing video games late at night in the kitchen when I heard knocking that turned out to be coming from the door leading to the garage. But when I checked, there was nothing there, and although it happened again while my mother was awake, nothing was ever found. My sister also used to claim that late at night you could hear a woman screaming in the utility room in the basement, which I dismissed until one 4th of July when she stayed over with her baby, and I clearly heard what sounded like a woman sobbing violently from that room, while both my sister and her child were asleep, forcing me to shut the door and wait upstairs until the sound stopped. Followed shortly after by the baby crying, making the difference between the two sounds unmistakably clear. Story 22. Not my story, but a friend's that I have heard a few times. When she was about 12, in the late 1990s, her family moved into a 2-story farmhouse in northern Michigan with an attic that ran the entire length of the house. Because of her father's job, they moved every couple of years, living in rentals until his contracts ended, something involving industrial machines and welding. The house was extremely isolated, with the nearest neighbor more than 2 miles away, and the next person even farther, almost an hour from town, which made waking up for the school bus miserable. But the rent was cheap and there was a huge garden space that her mother loved, while her father did not mind the commute. She had a brother who was 1 year older, and they both had their own rooms. The attic access was a stairway through a door in her brother's closet, and at first they were excited about the idea of creating a hangout space up there. But their parents strictly forbade it, saying the attic was filthy and full of boxes, antique trunks, and old furniture, and that if something fell and they got hurt, no one would hear them until it was too late, so they were not supposed to go up there at all. Adding to the temptation was a locked door at the far end of the attic, positioned above my friend's room, and they did not have the key. Their father shoved an old mattress and other items in front of it to discourage them further. According to her, the landlord had told her parents that everything in the attic had been left behind by previous tenants and he had never bothered sorting through it. And while he did not care if they went through the boxes, she never knew if he had explained what the locked room was for, which was part of why her parents did not want the kids up there. From time to time at night, she would hear quiet footsteps in the attic, boxes shifting, and faint movement. For her brother to reach the end of the attic above her room, he would have had to cross over their parents' bedroom and then back again, so she assumed he was sneaking around and would eventually get caught, not wanting to cause trouble by telling on him. Once or twice a week, she would wake up to clear footsteps, pacing quietly, boxes moving, and eventually a faint rhythmic creaking, and she would shut her eyes and force herself back to sleep, trying not to imagine what a 13-year-old boy might be doing in a forbidden attic to make that sound. About half a year after they moved in, she woke up late on a Saturday morning, saw her parents working in the garden, ate some cereal, and went back upstairs to play Pokemon, and for the first time ever, she heard footsteps in the attic during the day. Curious, she went to her brother's room and saw the closet door and attic stairs open. She crept up just far enough to see into the attic and immediately noticed that the boxes and mattress had been moved and that the locked door was now ajar. Her brother's head appeared from inside the room. He looked straight at her, smiling, called her by name, and told her she had to come see something, beckoning before sliding back out of sight. She told me she has never felt such immediate fear before or since, except the first time she heard a mountain lion in the woods at night, and she bolted down the stairs and ran outside to tell her parents, only to find her brother already in the yard, where he had been helping in the garden all morning. When her parents asked why she looked terrified, all she could say was that she heard someone in the attic. Her father told everyone to stay outside, grabbed a gun from his truck, and went inside with her mother, who stayed by the kitchen phone ready to call the police, instructing the kids to grab their bikes and ride to the neighbor's house if they did not come back out in 10 minutes. After several tense minutes, her father cleared the house and attic and came back out angry because the attic had clearly been rearranged and the lock opened, accusing her brother, who denied ever going up there and cited dust and spiders, as he later grew up to be a severe arachnophobe. When asked who opened the room, they went up and found it contained no light fixture and no window, just an old wooden rocking chair, nearly falling apart, facing the wall and unlike any other furniture in the house. Her brother was not punished much, because there was a thick layer of dust, and the only footprints were their father's, though it was obvious the boxes had been shoved aside, and lacking another explanation, he was grounded for the rest of the summer. My friend said she refused to go near the attic for the remaining 2 years they lived there, often sleeping on the downstairs couch to be farther away, because she continued to wake at night hearing quiet footsteps and what she now recognized as rocking, and the one time she was already awake when it started, she realized there was no sound of anyone crossing the attic, only the sound of someone settling into a chair and rocking almost directly above her bed. As an adult, she still has 2 recurring nightmares about that attic, one where whatever looked like her brother sticks its head out of the door, smiling and beckoning as it gets closer and closer until it reaches for her and she wakes in terror, and another where it is truly her brother, dusty and crying, begging for help before something pulls him back into the room and the door closes, leaving her frozen with guilt and fear. She has never told her brother what she saw or heard, and when I spoke to him about the house, he remembered only being angry about getting grounded for something he did not do, missing out on riding all-terrain vehicles with kids down the road, and while he recalled having many strange dreams while living there, he could never remember what they were about when he woke up. Story 23. I once had a woman in red knock at my door. She was dressed like a church lady, wearing a red dress with a matching blazer, a matching red hat with netting, and red heels. We were living in a trailer in the middle of nowhere, and the moment I saw her, I felt an intense sense of dread. So instead of opening the door, I called out asking what she wanted. When I yelled to her, she did not respond, but instead tried to open the doorknob. At that moment, my brother came in through the back door to grab a pack of beer for his friends, who were outside having a bonfire. He saw her and immediately went back out, walked around the side of the trailer, and then came back inside. His face was ghost white, and in a very serious tone, he told me not to open the front door. He locked the back door, and we went straight to his room. After a while, his friends came looking for him and knocked on the back door, but he told them we were done for the night and staying inside. When I pressed him about what he had seen, my brother told me that when he went outside and around the side of the trailer, nobody was there. But when he came back inside, he could clearly see her through the window. We have a lot of superstitions about lost spirits appearing as travelers, but whatever that was scared the living hell out of both of us. Story 24. About 10 years ago, my husband was active duty Army, and we lived in northern New York, about an hour's drive north of the base, in a small town with no friends or family nearby. One night he had overnight duty, the first time since I had moved there. The townhouse we rented had a screen door, an inner door with a deadbolt that opened into a mudroom, a door from the mudroom into the garage with a deadbolt on the mudroom side, and another door from the mudroom into the rest of the house. From there was a long hallway leading to 2 rooms on the right, the kitchen on the left, the living room straight ahead, and the stairs upstairs, with a back door at the far end of the living room that also had a deadbolt. We were from the West Coast, so mudrooms were strange to us, but I liked the idea and installed an additional latch deadbolt on the inside mudroom door that could only be opened from inside the house. Because it was a small town, many people did not lock their doors, but I grew up in a larger area, and locking everything was a habit, So I deadbolted every door as soon as my husband left. That night I was on the couch talking on the phone with my mom, who lived across the country, when I heard a car pull into the driveway, shut off, doors close, the screen door open, and the front door handle start to move, followed by a knock when whoever it was realized the door was locked. I told my mom to hold on, assuming my husband had come home early, and went toward the mudroom door, but froze when my mom said that he would have called first. I realized she was right, went to look out the kitchen window, and saw no one at the door and no car in the driveway, only the screen door standing wide open. I closed everything, checked the garage door, and made sure all the locks were secured. We hung up and I continued my night, but a few hours later I heard the screen door open again, then the deadbolt unlock and the front door open, followed by the mudroom door trying to open and stopping because of the latch I had installed. As I stood up, waiting for my phone to ring because I assumed it was my husband unable to get in, there was no call. Whoever it was stopped trying the door, slammed the front door shut, and left. As I stood there confused, I then heard the back door unlock and begin to open, only to slam shut again when they realized there was another lock. At that point, I should have been terrified, but adrenaline and being in my early 20s kept me oddly calm. A few minutes later, I heard my neighbor's door slam, the wife scream, the door slam again, and her husband running past the back of our houses. Shortly after, she was at my back window yelling for me not to open any doors or go outside, and I listened. I locked everything again, went upstairs, barricaded my bedroom door, slept with all the lights on, and the next day my neighbor mentioned they had caught someone trying doors, and that was the last time anyone talked about it. I never mentioned it to my husband or my parents until about 2 years ago, when we were buying a house and choosing an alarm system, and I still do not know who was there, what they wanted, or what could have happened. What I do know is that I was a very young woman with out-of-state plates, married to military, living in a military town where my husband had a strict routine, and the one and only time he broke that routine, someone tried to get into our home. We moved not long after, and months later, a friend who lived in the same townhouses across the street told me they were moving because someone had tried to break into their home on the first night her husband had 24-hour duty since arriving at that post. Story 25. My family lived 2 miles down a gravel road in what was literally a cabin in the woods of Minnesota. We had seasonal neighbors because there were resorts in the area closer to civilization, but the nearest town was 30 minutes away, even in good weather. It was late fall and I was in high school. One night I was doing homework at the kitchen table when I stood up to make some tea and saw a person staring directly through the window. I froze and they did not move either. Since it was late fall, the seasonal neighbors up the hill would have left by August, and I had assumed that after that point my family was completely alone, so I had no idea who this person could be. I ran to get my older sister, and she did not believe me until she came into the kitchen and saw the figure herself. She told my mom, who immediately called the police. The creepiest part was that the person slowly backed away from the window without any sense of urgency at all. For reasons I still do not understand, I turned on the deck lights, and we had a wraparound deck that covered half the house. The moment the lights came on, the person ran from the window, sprinted around the entire deck, and vanished into the night. The police came that night and returned the next morning, and that is when they found several strange details, including muddy footprints leading down the sidewalk and up onto the back porch, which also had uncovered windows, meaning the person had likely been watching us from there too. They also found clumps of newly laid sod that my mom had installed for a home project torn up, with one clump left sitting on the porch. To this day, we have no idea who that person was, but our family never talks about that night, and we are now the kind of people who always lock doors and close blinds, because you never really know who might be watching. Story 26. I once lived with my grandmother for a few weeks during a summer break while our apartment was being renovated. My mom was staying with a friend, and my sister was living with a woman whose son she babysat regularly. So almost all of my belongings were at my grandmother's place in a small village tucked into a valley. One summer evening, my aunt and cousins were visiting, and we were sitting in the backyard around a bonfire, talking and roasting sausages on sticks. When we finished, we noticed another bonfire on the side of a hill at the edge of a forest. It was too far away to see details clearly, but one thing was unmistakable. There were people wearing white robes dancing around the fire in circles. After a while, they stopped and began swaying side to side while holding hands, and then one of them seemed to notice us watching, because they all suddenly ran into the forest. We do not live in the United States, and this was near the southern Slovakian border with Hungary, so it was definitely not related to any well-known extremist group. It was the middle of summer, and there were no known religious or pagan events happening at the time. About 30 minutes later, after it got darker, the figures returned and began dancing around the fire again, before eventually walking back into the forest, leaving the bonfire to burn out on its own. I have never seen anything like it since, and I am convinced it was some kind of cult gathering, especially since they clearly noticed us watching. I also know it was not a movie set, because we had a clear view of the field, and there were no cameras, just people in white robes and a fire in the distance. Story 27. My parents lived in a very secluded part of town, several miles down back roads, far from everyone else, in a small neighborhood where each property was large and widely spaced. It was not unusual to see people walking along the road since there were a few houses farther up. But one night while I was out getting dinner with one of my brothers, my other brother texted me saying, half joking, to stop messing around and come inside already. I was completely confused because I was about 5 miles away, sitting in a drive-thru. When I asked what he meant, he told me he had heard 3 very loud knocks on the back door. We lived in a double-wide trailer at the time, so you could hear noises outside from almost anywhere in the house. He called me, and as he explained what had happened, I heard 3 more loud knocks through the phone. He went silent and then told me those knocks had come from the living room window facing the backyard. I immediately pulled out of the drive-thru and sped home, continuing to hear the knocks through the phone as he described them moving from window to window, the other living room window, my parents' bedroom windows, the window in my youngest brother's room, who was with me, then the front door, the kitchen window, the bathroom window, and finally back to the back door, each set about 45 seconds to a minute apart. By the time the knocking started circling the house again, I was pulling onto our street. I stopped at a neighbor's house, told my brother to grab the gun from my parents' room and lock the doors, and called the police, explaining that my brother was armed. When officers arrived about 10 minutes later, they searched the property and found no one at all. My brother said the knocking continued right up until the officers stepped onto the front porch, and I still have no idea how they did not hear it. It could have been a person messing with him and running off once the police arrived, but we never found out who or what it was, and my brother refused to stay home alone for months afterward. Story 28. We once lived in an extremely remote area of the Rocky Mountains on a ranch surrounded by thousands of acres of public land, with no neighbors and hours of travel to the nearest town. One night I went bow hunting with my loyal border collie and heeler mix, and after hearing an elk bugle over a ridge, we quietly crossed over and settled into a narrow flat as twilight fell. From the opposite hillside, less than 200 yards away, we suddenly heard intense snarling and fighting sounds that I can only assume were wolves, although I have never heard anything like it before or since. They sounded furious, growling and battling, and it was absolutely terrifying. I did not know if they could smell us or if they were headed our way, and my dog, who had experience with bear and mountain lion hunts and had never shown fear before, was completely petrified, silently begging me to leave. I was too scared to move, knowing I could not defend him with only a bow and 4 arrows if something came down the hill. We stayed completely still, shaking in the darkness, trying to be as small as possible until the sounds moved farther along the ridgeline. When it felt safe enough, we crept toward home through total darkness, both of us on edge. About half a mile from the house, my dog suddenly stopped and went into full defensive mode, barking fiercely and blocking my path. I froze and raised my bow, unable to see anything, until something moved in the darkness, black against black, and bounded away. It turned out to be one of our own black calves running off from my furious dog, and I started laughing while trying to calm him down. People often ask if I get scared living so remotely, and I usually say no, because the only thing I fear in the wilderness is other people. But that night remains the single time in my life when I was truly terrified out there in the mountains. Story 29. I went camping with a group of friends for a few nights. A few people left the first night because they were cold and got soaked when the rain came. The rest of us toughed it out, and seeing the others' tent the next morning, we knew they were not staying another night either, because it was drenched and everything inside was soaked, sleeping bags, clothes, and all of it. Night 2 was still rainy, but not as bad as night 1. The others got a motel room about 5 miles away, and we were welcome to join them, but nobody else did. Around 11:30 at night, or about an hour after bedtime, Jake's dog suddenly went nuts, barking, snarling, and carrying on. A couple of us decided to walk him and see what was going on, and after about 5 minutes the dog calmed down, so we all went back toward bedtime while a few people stayed by the dwindling fire. They added more wood because one of the girls felt uneasy after the rain and the way the dog had acted. They stayed out there for a while, then one of the girls came to my spot and woke me up. About 10 minutes earlier, Jake's dog had started again. They tried to take it for a walk, and the dog got loose. We called and called, but all we could hear was barking and snarling, and strangely the sounds seemed to be coming from the direction that was all lake. We searched with flashlights and even used several cars to shine headlights around the area. Eventually we heard the dog whining and crying. The biggest predator out there should have been a coyote, maybe a pack. But when we found the dog the next day, it looked like it had been skinned, and nearly every bone was broken in some way. The hide was never found, and the bite marks on the body were odd and large, much larger than what a coyote should be able to do. The collar was still around its neck, but there was no skin. About 2 or 3 feet off the trail, there was a large burned area, and the strange thing was that we had walked through there on the way to the site 2 days earlier, and it had not been burned at all, so we would have seen it. The area was remote, even with the motel being 5 miles away, and there were no fires there that we knew of. Jake was devastated and wanted to dig a hole and bury his dog, but someone suggested we should tell the rangers. One of the girls called the local police department. They contacted the rangers, and a ranger hiked in and arrived around lunchtime, even though nobody felt like eating. The ranger told us we could dig the hole, or he could call for help and have the body carried out. And Jake said digging was best, so we dug a grave in the burned area and buried the dog there. The ranger also asked about the burn patch, which was not very big, only about the size of a car or maybe a truck. We kept camping and hiking, and the others rejoined us for the next few nights, and nothing else strange happened until we hiked back out. When we reached our old spot where the dog had been buried, there was yellow tape up and the trail was blocked off completely. A chain-link fence about 3 meters or around 10 feet high had been put up in a huge circle about 300 yards or roughly 300 meters from the camp spot. There were armed guards about 100 feet or around 33 meters off the path. We approached because we did not know if we could continue to the parking area to get our cars, since some vehicles were left there, and the Jeeps were the only ones that could keep going deeper into the woods. Only the owners of the cars were allowed to pass, escorted by an armed guard, and they retrieved the vehicles and met us by the highway later, saying they had been led to the cars and made to follow a different guard in a Jeep. The rest of us had to find another way out, and we realized the fence was massive, but we could not see anything inside that explained it. At the trailhead, there was a government camper that I later learned was a command post type vehicle, along with several tractor-trailer trucks carrying trailers that looked like windowless mobile homes with roll-up doors. Every vehicle had government plates. We were told to leave, and we did, and we were also warned that if we did not listen, we could end up locked up. A few days later, Jake decided he wanted to go back to visit his dog, which none of us could blame him for, so a few of us returned with him. When we reached the area we were sure was the right cove and path, we came to a clearing that had been bulldozed flat, with trees gone, rocks gone, and the dog's grave likely gone too, although I cannot say for certain we stood on the exact spot. We never found out why any of it happened or what was going on. I have been back a few times over the years, though I live far away now and not in more than 10 years, and the last time I was there, not much had grown back besides grasses and small plants, with no real trees, which still seemed odd given how thick the surrounding growth is. The trails have also been moved away from that spot, and no one is allowed to camp overnight in that section anymore, with the new trailhead starting in a different place and avoiding the water until much farther in, looping around the lake.